This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
The influence and legacy of Dr. Michael S. Heiser. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. We've got a special program this month for our Iron and Myth Roundtable as we discuss a man whose work and friendship has changed the course of our lives. Joining me for this program, the pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado in Boulder, Colorado, Pastor Doug Van Dorn, best-selling author, award-winning screenwriter Brian Godawa, and our friendly neighborhood PhD, Dr. Jed Burton. Well, guys, as we're recording this on February 19th, 2023, just to timestamp this because this will be released at some point in the future. As of this evening, as of this recording, our good friend Dr. Michael Heiser is still with us. But as he is made publicly available, so we're not sharing any confidences here, he is at home and in hospice care. Thankfully, just this past week, as we're recording this, he was able to celebrate his 60th birthday at home. Drina shared that information and shared that he was, although weak, able to have some chocolate cake. So, praise God for small miracles. And she's posted some really wonderful things. Yeah, amen.
Chocolate cake is heavenly, baby.
Posted some really wonderful things about her experiences through this as it's been about 18 months now, August of 21, that Mike shared his diagnosis. So I know, speaking for myself, and I'm sure that you guys all agree, just Mike's work is foundational to what we do. Is that overstating it?
Nope.
Not at all.
Spot on. Changed my life, man. I mean, literally changed my spiritual life in many ways.
Changed the whole course of my life. I was selling steel when we stumbled across, or was led to, Mike's work. I guess that's a story. How did we all come to know about Mike and his research? Jed, where did you first encounter Mike?
And you got to give the date so we see who's the luckiest one who got to meet him first, or connect with him first. So this is a competition here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first time that I physically met Mike was in 2009 at the Ancient of Days conference. But I was a big Art Bell Coast to Coast AM fan when I was in graduate school. And I was sort of, anthropologically orienting myself along the trajectory of what would become the essence of my research agenda, and thinking about a lot of these things already. And then I heard Mike on Coast to Coast. It must have been in 2001 or thereabouts.
Wow.
2001, 2002, somewhere in there. I remember exactly what I was reading. I was reading something that had absolutely nothing to do with what Mike was talking about, but I was kind of multitasking. The professor for this seminar that I was in had assigned us some Max Weber, classic sociology to read, and I'm just sort of reading this essay, and then Mike comes on and is talking about all this stuff in the Bible that had sort of been percolating in my mind for a number of years. And I had been looking into basically every mythological tradition I could find with analogs for what was in the Genesis 6 narrative. Celtic mythology, Egyptian mythology, Mesopotamian mythology, mythology from the Americas, Micronesia, the South Pacific, both Saharan and Sub-Saharan Africa, European folklore, anything that I could get my hands on. I was reading, and Mike just sort of puts all the pieces together that I was kind of missing, and it all started to pop into reality. And I thought, okay, now here's a guy who I think fundamentally, crucially understands this stretch of the Bible, and he's not he's not particularly concerned with wherever the public trajectory of the discourse of theology is going. So I respected him for that to begin with, because he was in my eyes immediately a rock star. And what else can I say? After that, I was hooked, and so I started checking out what he was putting online at the time, and just followed the research that he had done up at that point. And that's how I became familiar with Mike's work. I think I had sent him a couple of emails during that time, and just increasingly followed his work, and then was fortunate enough to meet him in Roswell at the 2009 Ancient of Days conference. And we hit it off immediately, because I was deep in the throes at the time of writing my dissertation on the sacred geography of Peneus. And so we were a lot of what the two of us were doing at the time was overlapping. And Mike picked up on that, and the rest is history. It led to, a number of different collaborations, and, a friendship that I've treasured and continue to treasure to this day. And his work on the Divine Council, I think, as we've all pointed out, has been crucial, for the direction that all of our work, has taken over the last 10, 15 plus years.
That really was an odd mix. You don't normally find credentialed Bible scholars who are also respected ufologists.
Yeah.
Right. But I knew that's the very reason I knew I would be able to catch him in Roswell. And I happened to mention to my buddy Cliff, I'm like, hey, Heiser's going to be at this thing. We need to be there. And so we made it a road trip, and it was epic. What can I say?
We had the opportunity, thanks to Tom Horn, to go down to Roswell for the 70th anniversary of the crash in 2017. So Sharon and I were there with Josh Peck, and Mike was there as well. So we got to meet with Mike, our good friend Natalina, who sadly is no longer with us, and Guy Malone, who we call our missionary to Roswell, who coordinated and put together those Ancient of Days Bible UFO conferences. That was really something, to be there in the 70th anniversary and to see Mike's presentation on how science fiction entertainment is essentially evangelizing for the alien gospel. And Brian, that's right.
When was the first time you met? That wasn't the first time you met him, though, was it?
No, we'd met him previously.
When?
Because he'd been at Skywatch TV prior to that. As Tom Horn has published a couple of his books, and God bless Mike for being willing to affiliate with the crazy people who hang around Tom Horn. Because there are some respected scholars out there whose work I really appreciate, who I've approached for interviews for this program, who once they found out, oh, well, you're one of those. So no, I can't, because you believe in Nephilim and giants and you hang out with Tom Horn and stuff. But Mike not only was willing to share information, he's had several books now published by Tom, Reversing Hermon, which was really good one. His companions to the Book of Enoch, volumes 1 and 2.
Which are terribly formatted in Kindle and EPUB and need to be republished in that sense so that there'll be better experience for the readers.
I can't argue with you there. Sharon and I are both big readers on the e-readers. Everything I've got is, if I've got a digital copy, I'm sorry, the paper copy is, we've got bookcases behind me, as you can see, but the digital copies are the ones that get read. But so we'd met Mike previous to that, to the 2017 experience, and we were fortunate enough to convince Mike and Drina to join us in Israel in 2018. And Brian, you were there with us as well, you and Kimberly, which was really epic.
That was a lifetime experience for us personally. That was Kim and my best vacation ever.
Did you go with them to Greece afterwards?
No.
Oh, okay. Shame. We would have loved to have gone to Greece, but we were already booked to, take the tour over to Jordan to, go to Mount Nebo and Petra and all that. But to hear Mike teach there were two things from that tour that really stand out. A lot of things that actually stand out, but two that were really highlights. Number one was hearing Mike teach on the importance of Mount Hermon at the Mount Hermon Nature Reserve on the slopes of Mount Hermon.
Yeah.
And then secondly, having him teach on the importance of baptism and the reasons we baptize and the connections between baptism in 1 Peter 3, the flood of Noah, and the spirits who disobeyed in the days of Noah at the Jordan River.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was really phenomenal.
What was really cool to me too about meeting them was just to meet Drina, and just what a, precious, wonderful woman she is. And she's feels very similar to me and my wife in terms of our difference of personalities, and I'm all into the intellectual stuff, and my wife my wife has not read any of my books, and I'm pretty sure Drina said she doesn't read Mike's either, because they love us for who we are, it has nothing to do with our books or whatever, and but it was just, and plus it was just a privilege to hang out with them and eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and plus I have to boast that I was, we had, I think was it more than 2 buses, or was it just 2 buses?
I think it was 2 buses. I think we were about 85 or 90 people on that tour.
Yeah. And so Kim and I jockeyed to try to make sure we got on Mike's bus. So we were on his bus with him all the time,
Yeah.
But I do remember though that we were,
if Sharon and I hadn't been leading the bus, we'd have been on Mike's bus too. But we had to be on our own bus. So,
but it's interesting because as we were walking around, Mike didn't give all the lectures, so we had other people giving lectures and stuff too. And I just remember always straining our necks, looking over at Derek at your group, because you guys had a better tour guide speaker, and we'd always be wanting to hear. Oh, I think we had the little earbuds so that you can hear the speaker talking. Right. And so we would switch over to your channel because you guys had a better speaker. It was great.
Yeah, the tour guides for Lipkin Tours are generally excellent. And the fellow that we've had, because we had him again in 2019, Yeshai Avatal. And then in 2019, we also had another fellow named Kuti Ben David. Kuti and Yeshai are awesome. They, if not the best tour guides in Israel, I don't know who is. But the fellow who we had in 2018, he didn't quite read the room, and he was making jokes about Americans and Donald Trump, and not realizing that the Christians in our group were probably Trump voters, and so it was a little awkward. But and I remember also he led the group when we were in the city of David. We were down in the tunnels of Hezekiah, the Western Wall tunnels, and he started leading the group to one of the synagogues, and there were women in the group, and women in the synagogue. Yeah, we were told very quickly and in no uncertain terms we were entering a forbidden area. That didn't happen the following year, but having Mike available and his teaching, that was really.
But actually, it was doubly special for us, Derek, because we got to be there with you as well, you and your wife, and my wife got to meet your wife and get to know her. And your wife is also just amazing. And we just had the best of time getting to know. And, there's lots of different viewpoints within that group of people, but we all had that common connection. And it was just a real wonderful time of fellowship with heroes and friends of that world that we haven't. Now, I know you guys go through all these conferences and stuff that I don't go to. So for me, that was a real special, precious time to be able to share with y'all. So,
Doug, when did you first become aware of Mike's work?
I was just looking back on it. It was earlier than I thought. I thought it was 2011 or so, but it's actually 29. Give you a little preface to this. It wasn't from Coast to Coast or anything. I love that show, but Judd, I'm not like you, and I'm not staying up for very many of those shows. I had just written.
I was in graduate school. I was in graduate school. I wasn't sleeping that much anyway.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I had just put out my first book, which was on baptism, and this is kind of an important preface for me. So in that book, I take this totally different track on take on baptism than anything I've ever read, and I had been reading a bunch of stuff from Meredith Kline and Greg Beale on the temple. And so that had made me hypersensitive to anything that I would read along those lines. And so right about the time that I put that out, I guess I was preaching through Exodus and came across this article from this guy that I'd never heard of. And it was on Deuteronomy 32 and some textual variant on it. And like, I don't usually sit down and read entire journal articles, but I read that one because it was so interesting. And then I just put it away because, like Judd, it had absolutely nothing to do with what I was studying. I don't even know why it came up in the Google search, but it did. And then, a few weeks later, preaching on something else in Exodus, because that's all about the temple. So I'm guessing that was the connection. Up comes another paper or a blog or something. And I just read it and I thought, man, this sounds exactly like that other paper. I wonder if it could possibly be the same guy. And it turns out that it was the exact same guy, and it was Mike. And at that moment, I'm like, well, I got to find out more about this guy. Has he written anything else? Who is he? Because, he's obviously some sort of a scholar to have a published article in BibSac and stuff. So find out right away that he's into the UFO world, and that he goes down to Roswell and does conferences as like biblical evangelism, teaching biblical theology to UFO people. And I'm like, this is what I'm down for, is this guy. So, that was right about the time that he was putting out The Myth That Is True, which was his kind of early version of the Unseen Realm. And so I read through that, giving it out for free, and he wanted fans to kind of comment and stuff like that. And I got so into it that I created an index for the back of that thing. I still have it, like a tabulated index for that book. Just devoured the content, like I think probably all of us did. And I knew absolutely nobody that was in that world. So that the only reason I really ever wrote Giants was to me try to work the thing out in my head. The only way I could figure out to do it was to write, because I couldn't talk to anybody, because nobody in my circles talks about this kind of stuff. So
when did you first meet him?
I first met him I suppose in person right around 2015, it was right in 2016 when we moved into the house that we're in. I had gotten to know him earlier than that because I sent him my copy of the Unseen Realm Catechism thing. Ended up becoming that. And that was funny because I had never talked to him before. And except for on blogs, like some sort of a lurker that comes out of the closet every once in a while. So he kind of knew who I was, but when I sent the emails thinking, I wonder if he'll respond to this, and you get the response back on the automatic response on the email, like, I will probably read your email, but I'm super busy. So I didn't think I'd ever hear back. And I heard back from him, like within 30 minutes and, personally. So that was really the first time I met him. So that was probably 2013 or something. And then when Logos was having him go around, they said that they would pay for him to come out to churches and teach the Unseen Realm material. Ooh. I was all over that. And so we brought him out to our church in 2016, and he did a 2-day seminar for it. And we walked around Pearl Street Mall in Boulder and talked about Bigfoot. And that's actually how the paranormal thing, that was the first time I had heard about that. I don't know, Brian, if he had told you about that before that or not, but he had said, I have this idea for a podcast, this paranormal podcast where we would just have lay people go and read peer-reviewed journals on crazy stuff. He goes, would you be interested in doing it? And I couldn't even believe that he would ask me a question like that.
Totally,
and
man.
I'm like, of course I'll do that.
You want me? Yeah, totally. Same here.
So, yeah.
For people who've not, for people
like all
who
of you guys, it's through Mike that I got to know every one of you. So all these friendships that we have are directly related to him.
For people who've not heard of Paranormal, what was that? What made that so unique?
Well, Mike was the ringleader of it, and so he was kind of the host. The rest of us were guest hosts, I guess you could say, been panelists, whatever. Brian and I, Natalina, and a guy named Doug Overmeyer, and then Trey Strickland was the guy who kind of put the thing together. So he would kind of be on every once in a while. Yeah. I think Judd did a episode or two with us. And I mean, it was just it was an interesting concept because you have, you just pick a strange topic, crop circles or, whatever you want to talk about. And he would find all the peer-reviewed journal articles, and then he'd send them out to us, and then we would have however long to read them, and then we would just get together and talk about it. And I learned a lot about the peer-reviewed process by itself just doing that show.
Yeah, totally.
And of course, and Nat passed away a couple years ago, and that was the end of that.
Yeah, for me, it's funny because we were all kind of, unless you, Derek, I don't remember you saying exactly when you first heard him, but I too heard him around the same time, around 2009. So we're all discovering him about the same time. My context was that I had been working on a movie script, and it was for a Bible story that I thought would be perfect. Hollywood would love it because it's ancient world with lots of bizarre stuff. And then, religious people, Christians and Jews and maybe Muslims would even love it. It's like the perfect 4-quadrant, movie that would appeal to many people, right? And it was Noah, Primeval. And so I was doing a little research for that. And that's when I stumbled upon online his the myth that is true, And I'm like, and of course, I'm always, I'm concerned about where people are coming from to know what their bias is. And so when I found out, I was like, wow, he's an evangelical scholar, believes the Bible is God's word. I'm like, this is pretty cool, And so I used some of that in my own research for the script, which ultimately became my novel, which ultimately became my series, and all of my Bible novels, Nephilim, Watchers, and even the Apocalypse. They're all based on that same divine counsel concept, or what I call the Watcher paradigm, that I first learned through him. And so I contacted him, because we all knew him before he was famous, right? So I'm like, he's like, I know he's some scholar, like nobody contacts scholars. So I'm going to, because I had some questions, And then I wrote this horror movie where I have alien abductions in there and stuff. And of course, it turns out to be demons. But at one point where the woman that got abducted, she speaks ancient Sumerian, right? And there's also cuneiform on some bricks in the foundation. It's like, what's going on here, right? And so I actually asked him if he could, give me a, cuneiform and pronunciation of a couple phrases from that would be related to Baal, or Baal, right? And so he did that, and he gave me little recordings, So I still got them to this day because I never got the movie made, right? But so that's what launched. And he's like, "Are you the Brian Goodell who wrote To End All Wars?" He's like, "Hey, I'm writing The Facade. Maybe we can make a movie out of this." And that never really kind of came together. But that's when it started. And then I met him, I think just a year or so later, like 2010 or 11. Every year they have these evangelical theological conferences. I can't remember which one it was.
ETS, probably, the Evangelical Theological.
Yeah. And it was down in San Diego.
Yep.
And then I met him there, and then we had him and Drina. His whole family actually was in town another time for some conference and stuff. So we went out to eat with him and stuff. And that's how that's when I first got to meet him and got to know him a little bit better. And then of course, I guess just that was in the beginning time, in the beginning years where he was first putting together Miklot. And so he asked me if I'd be willing to be a member on his board. And so I have been ever since. So that was, again, a high honor. I'm thinking like, you want me? It's like knowing his scholarship, and I know all of us feel this way, and most of except you, Judd, we're kind of, we're not the professional theologians, or we don't have the doctorate degrees. And well, I'm sorry, maybe you guys do. And Doug, do you probably have one in ministry? No, okay. Anyway, the point is the academic in that world, and just having that sort of man who also loves God affords you a level of respect, even though you're a layman. And it's just, wow. That was the how should I say, the incarnation, or the living out of his own view, which was he wanted to reach the layman with this theology. And of course he did it, and praise God. And it's going to be there now for generations. And, And so, but then that Israel trip was probably, like I said, it was just wonderful. Because Derek, when you said that, actually, wasn't I the one who, like, you're talking about all these trips? I'm like, wasn't I the one that said, I can't remember. I thought I was the one that said, we should get Mike to go or something. And you're like, well, yeah, I'll contact him. And then you got him, and like, he's going. So I told Kim, we got to go.
Yeah,
She's
that
like,
may well be. And I think, Mike was like, well, I don't know. And then he came back to me and said, yeah, Adrena says we got to go.
Yeah. Yeah, that was just so cool.
I got to tell you two a funny story. I don't know that Judd would know this person, but I know you two do because you were on that trip. And there's a fellow named Philip who was on that trip.
Yes.
And I got to tell you about this story because this is amazing. So this is 2012 now, and I still really have never met Mike. And we decided we were going to plant a church in South Denver. So we sent two of our elders down there, and we decided to kind of advertise that we would start a radio show. So the two pastors would kind of get together, do a show. We decided to go through Genesis. And we had like this noon Sunday time. We thought, this would be perfect. Everybody's kind of getting out of church and they'll listen to it on the KRKS 94 FM, biggest Christian station here in town. So 11 months of this show, I got 0 calls, 0 people visited our church. Same with the church plant. It was a total flop. We wasted so much money, but I got one call, one phone call. That's it. And it was right after the Genesis 6 episode. And it's 2:00 in the afternoon, and this low, definitely black voice is on the phone on this answering machine. He goes, I just heard this show on Genesis 6, and my name is Tom, and I think he goes, my name is Tom Graham, and I want you to give me a call back. I'd like to talk to you about it. So I call the guy back when I get home. And I forgot what his name was at that point in time. And as I start talking to him and, figuring that this guy is a Christian, no doubt. This guy's serious about his Bible, complete evangelical. And I'm like, this is really a surreal conversation. At some point I said, why are you so interested in this stuff? And he said, well, it's through the work of a guy named Mike Heiser. He goes, I know him. And I'm like, well, how in the world could you have ever met Michael Heiser? And he goes, well, my former job has its privileges. And I'm like, all of a sudden, all these wheels start clicking in my head because I'm a lifetime fan living here in Denver. And I go, what's your name again? And he goes, my name is Tom Graham. And I'm like, well, now wait a minute. I know a famous Tom Graham who was in Colorado. He played for the Broncos. He goes, that's me. And his son, one of his sons played NFL, won a Super Bowl with the Patriots, named Daniel, tight end, grew up, born in Denver, went to CU. And then, so Tom and I hit it off like no other relationship I've ever had in my life. Tom ended up passing away from basically consequences to concussions from the NFL back in 2017. And I hadn't really met, well, I'll tell you one other thing. Before Tom passed away, Mike visited out here one other time for some reason. And I think another church had brought him in. And I told him, I said, Mike, Tom's not doing well. And he's in the hospital. He said, well, we need to go down and see him. So we drove down to South Denver, and we went into the room and completely surprised him. And there's Mike Heiser. That's exactly the kind of guy that he is. He went out of his way to go see a friend that was dying in the hospital. And so when Tom died, I hadn't got to know really the rest of his family. I decided I wanted to get to know his widow and his oldest son, Philip. We've kind of hit it off since then too. And just, I loved their family, and Philip started hearing about all this stuff and completely bought into the thing. So I consider the fact that I kind of went with you guys to Israel vicariously through Philip.
Well, Brian, you weren't there because you didn't go with us over to Jordan, but Philip, while he was in Jordan, and one of the places we stopped was a place that did metalwork. And apparently Philip collects ceremonial swords. So he bought one. Cool. And didn't think about the problems of getting past Israeli security with a long, sharp, pointy object coming in from Jordan. So, yeah, There you go. Something like that. And so our bus was held up, and we were actually on kind of the clock because Sharon and I had to get to the airport there in Eilat to fly to Tel Aviv because we were joining up with Timothy Alberino on the True Legends tour that was going to Sardinia to visit the tombs of the giants. So we're sitting there and we're waiting while Philip is being grilled by Israeli security. And finally he came running out, and it's like, okay, we made it. We got plenty of time, but it was that's one of the funny stories. So yeah, funny how that's all connected through Mike as well.
Yep.
We first became aware of him, I think, around 2004. And Sharon and I at the time were writing fiction. Sharon is still writing fiction. Obviously, she's got, 8 novels now in the Red Wing Saga series. Plus, she's got a new series that's drawing on some of the stuff she was writing back in 2002, 3, and 4. I was trying my hand at it and realizing that I didn't know enough theology to really make a good, or at least an accurate story. So I was looking for what I could find because I wanted to do, the cool thing with the Sumerian text showing up in the unexpected places. So without being cliched.
Yeah.
And I stumbled onto an online book by Peter Goodgame. Peter Goodgame, who wrote a book that he put online at his website, redmoonrising.com, called Against World Powers. And it was there that I, not only Mike, but I was introduced to the work of David Rohl, who's sort of a renegade Egyptologist. He's challenged the timeline of Egypt fairly convincingly, but I think he goes too far in shifting his timeline. But it was interesting because in that same paper, or that same online book, Peter pointed out the work of Mike in the divine council concept. That was the first time I'd ever encountered it. And so I took this to Sharon. I said, this makes a lot of sense. Suddenly this weird stuff in the Old Testament is making sense. And so when we started our podcast in March of 2005, which 6 months after they developed the XML code to syndicate podcasts, is back when Apple was still begging for podcasters to submit content. They don't do that anymore because now everybody's got a podcast. But we're still going, Rabbit, the grandparents of podcasting. And so we interviewed Mike. We reached out to Mike and we interviewed him. And I remember very clearly because those were the days where you didn't have Skype or Zoom or anything else. We literally had to call him on the phone and then connect an interface with alligator clips we bought for like $5 at Radio Shack. And then we had to run that into our Sony Handycam, which converted that analog signal into a digital signal that we could then output into my laptop. And that's how
this was when 1905.
It feels like it now. You had to turn
it was back in 04. You did
right.
She had to turn a crank in order to power the generator. So that was where we first, and God bless him, because here are these random people doing this. This is a what? A podcast, that's back then when Apple was still made the iPod, which is where the name, they don't even make the iPod anymore. We've outlived the iPod.
Wow. So
that's where that came from. And because of that, then we went back to him a number of times on different subjects. And I'm just glad I never erased any of those MP3 files because those are still available on the archives. One thing that people didn't know, and you probably spotted this on the tour, Brian, Mike constantly wore that Boston Red Sox cap.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, dude, you're from Pennsylvania. You got your degree at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Why are you a Red Sox fan? Just always was. And so he has, for the past 10 years, been the commissioner of the Naked Bible Fantasy Baseball League, of which I have participated. I've actually won the league twice, and once I defeated defeated Mike's team. It was an epic beatdown. So that was a lot of fun because again, seeing that window, because I know he also played fantasy football because he and Trey Strickland, who did the engineering for the Naked Bible podcast, would talk about his the fantasy football success. That to me was a bridge too far, but the fantasy baseball thing, happy to take part in that, but not the kind of thing you'd expect from a guy who is so, well, so clearly skilled in his chosen vocation, which is the biblical texts and the languages in which they were originally written.
Yeah, I would. That was one of the cool things about Mike is like I would say easily like every other time we broke bread together, it was after it was watching a football game and eating chicken wings or pizza or whatever. That's I treasure that as much as I treasure all of the other stuff that we collaborated on. And Mike is he's just that kind of guy. Mm-hmm. He's just salt of the earth.
In fact, Mike and I were approached by another fellow, Mark Combs, who was an author as well, wrote the book and the beginning about the importance of the story of Noah and the flood. And all three of us were in that Naked Bible Fantasy Baseball League. So in 2019, we actually produced a weekly podcast on fantasy baseball.
Wow. Hey, what about our stories? We should tell our stories because we had this offline once. We were talking about our stories of how we the joy of like telling Michael something he didn't yet know.
Oh yeah,
remember that? I was like, yeah, I shared something with Mike that he didn't know, and I know mine was many years ago, and I don't know. I just remember like in my research, I stumbled upon these Dead Sea Scroll verses, and I found this stuff about the bastard spirits and stuff, and I'm like, I said to him like, Mike, have you seen this? This seems like this would be a part of this, wouldn't it? And he's always, yeah, I hadn't seen that one before on the email or something. I'm like, oh, I shared a scripture, or not scripture, but a Dead Sea Scroll fact about the Nephilim that Mike didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was listening to his Naked Bible podcast, and he was going through the book of Ezekiel, and he mentioned in passing that I had pointed out something on a paper that he had shared with me, a paper that I've referred to a bunch of times. I think I've cited in every one of my books so far, called El's Abode, or the Abode of El is what it means. But El's Abode by Edward Lipinski, who's a very well-known Belgian scholar. And he really a deep dive. I had to read it like 12 times to get my head around it. But he argues that there are essentially two locations that were considered the dwelling place of the Canaanite creator god El. One of them is in the mountains of Armenia, which is interesting because that's, Ararat. And the other was Mount Hermon. And somehow, I guess in scanning over the paper, Mike had missed that Lipinski had concluded that one of the two locations, he actually referred to it as the Canaanite Mount Olympus. El's abode was Mount Hermon. And, to me, that was sort of that was like one of the main points of the paper. But like I said, I had to read it 12 times to get my head around it. And I had mentioned that to Mike in passing, and he mentioned it and gave me credit for it during his podcast. I was ready to pull over and just do a dance around the outside of the car, Score one for the layman.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had it when he came out here to the church to teach that seminar. I don't know how it came up, but I probably just came right out and said it. Have you ever heard of Plato talking about the divine council? He goes, what are you talking about? And I said, well, it's like he ripped Moses off. I mean, he steals the very first few words of Deuteronomy 32:7. He says, remember the days of old, and, your fathers will tell you. And then, when the gods had divided the land by allotment. And then Plato goes on and talks about how God gave to Greece Hephaestus and Athena or something like that. And then how this is right. This is in the Cretaeus. So he's talking about Atlantis, and he says, and Poseidon was the one who got allotted Atlantis. And I'm reading this going, whoa, that's crazy stuff. So I told him about that. And he had never heard about that before. And I'm like, he goes, he even said to me, he goes, guess I'm going to have to use that one. You know, yeah.
I don't know that I was ever able to, like, you know, unveil something to Mike, because so much of our work was just overlapping. Like, I remember that first time we met, you know, I was telling him about my dissertation. He'd finish a sentence and he'd be like, "Oh yeah, I'm doing that too." And, you know, here's what I think about this. But the one thing that he circled back to me for over the years was the work that I was doing on connecting vampire lore to this narrative. He always wanted to talk about that. And in fact, you know, that was, I think those are the topics that we discussed when he asked me to come on Paranormal. And when he started Fringe Pop, you know, he was like, you know, you got to come on and talk about this stuff. I'm like, of course I will. I liken it kind of to, and Derek will understand this, this sort of giddy fascination that we have with the old Hammer horror films, that, you know, Christopher Lee, you know, used to be in, and some of the kind of the more off the wall ones. But,
yeah,
some of the most interesting conversations that I treasure just because of the way that we were interacting on the topic, centered around connecting that narrative back to the Bible and how it made sense looking at it through the biblical lens.
His boiling it down to sort of the Genesis 6 worldview and then the Deuteronomy 32 worldview really helped to kind of frame Old Testament history. You've got this, as he put it, you know, you ask a Jew of the Second Temple period, you got the sin of the in the garden, which most Christians today would say that's why the world's in such a state. But Jews would say, yeah, you got that one, but you've also got Babel. And then you've also got this weird thing in Genesis chapter 6. And most of us never really understood that. And of course, the Babel incident was what resulted in God dividing the nations and numbering them according to the number of sons of God, which Jews have always been taught. I mean, the rabbis who have a view of, say, a futurist view of eschatology believe that the nations are under the control of 70 angels, which is why the Temple Institute to this day is still looking forward to, you know, bringing the 70 nations back to bring forth the third temple. But that number 70, of course, representing all of them. In other words, everybody but Israel is in that 70. But that's the biblical concept that's derived from Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. And again, that's one of those things that Mike pointed out, that when he explained it and you go look at the Bible, it's like, yeah, that's really in here. Wow. Okay. So now we've got these lesser Elohim who've been sort of delegated responsibility, and they decided to take worship for themselves instead of serving their king. Okay. Now I begin to see why the world's in such a mess. But the Jews knew that all along, and the early church did too. When you read the writings of the early church fathers, like Doug, as you pointed out in your book, Giants, suddenly this all makes sense. We're just in the middle of a great big war that has been shielded from most of us by the way we've been raised up in church.
And by the way, I wanted to add something to that too. So, you know, we've got this, you know, the Divine Council worldview, but also, I think one of the things about his work that made it one step higher than just, oh, here's a good, strong biblical explanation for a weird passage like the Nephilim, Genesis 6, and maybe here or there. But it was like he addressed all the weird passages in the Bible that over the years, you know, I'd become familiar with, having read the Bible outright, and basically just sort of, well, that's weird. I don't know what that means, and just keep going on, you know, like Azazel and the, you know, and the, what was it? The ordeal, you know, the trial by ordeal, and all those weird passages of the Bible that also happen to be very difficult passages, including the wars of Yahweh, you know, in the Holy Land, right? Killing all those people, right? And realizing and learning through his work, you know, and like, cause he would have like books like Don't Bore Me with the Bible, you know, where he would address these specific strange passages. But what has been so exciting to me was how this narrative thread that was weaving what really explained a lot of that stuff, almost all of it, in a way that had never before. And it turned me into a more, like, that was the stuff that I would avoid because, it's like, I don't know the answer to that, and I don't want to get in trouble, with unbelievers or believers, right? And so now it's like, no, I like the weird stuff and the controversial and the stuff that's hard, because that's oftentimes an expression of that narrative thread that actually explains a lot in the Bible, So that's been really exciting for me.
I think
and of course, that's another inspiration of what I, wove into all my novels. I've got all the weird stuff in there in the Bible in my novels because that's the stuff that interested me, and it made for a great way to see the Bible in a fresh way.
Well, that's one of the things that's really exciting, Brian, and I know that Sharon has tapped into this as well. When you understand that conflict, your palette then as a writer is so full. You don't need to sensationalize or add anything to it because it's all in there. I mean, dragons and wizards and giants. Yeah. It's all there.
Yeah. That was another inspiration for my fiction because, it's like, I don't know, there's just something about, I think we're all drawn to, whether it's superhero stories or myths, we're as humans, we're just drawn to the fantasy, and the spiritual. But I think fantasy as a genre, with all of its multiplicity of, obviously takes, is sort of that longing for the spiritual world. I really believe that. And that's why I decided, you know what? I'm going to take the leap and do the Lord of the Rings thing with the Bible, thinking that, oh man, Christians are really going to attack me for this, But I knew what I was doing was, as I saw it and understood it, was theologically truthful. So I was willing to take that risk. And of course it paid off, because it turns out, a lot of Christians have been tuning into this view, and they get it, and they understand the tension that there is when you are addressing these supernatural components that, by and large, have left, at least certainly the evangelical church and, even Reformed churches and such like that, and bringing it back into an understanding of the Bible. It's not. And of course, I've said this many times on the show. I've come from that background of being quite anti-supernatural in some ways. But bringing it back into such a way is not just like, oh, see, I know, and now I know and believe there are angels and demons. I know it. It's like, no. It's like understanding God and His Word better, because that is woven into His revelation of who He is and how He interacts with us. That's why this is so powerful, because we're not promoting like, this is our unique little distinctives. It's like, no, it changes the way we see a lot in the Bible, and it makes it more rich. It doesn't change it in a Gnostic way, like we have this secret, way of seeing the Bible, and it's like, no, it's there in plain sight if you take it through, and here's the key, ancient Near Eastern eyes. And I think that was the biggest draw to me, was because he stayed focused, primarily on the Bible. Yeah, a lot of Second Temporal literature, but the whole point was anybody with any sense of understanding knows that even the translation of the Bible itself relies on ancient Near Eastern language and context. And a lot of words we don't even understand, not sure what they mean in Hebrew, we're getting the understanding from drawing from cognate languages, right? And so it's like, if your Bible translation itself is the act of what we're doing, which is drawing from ancient Near Eastern context, and that, I think that's one of the components that I've seen reacting against our movement, is this sort of, it's this sort of, gosh, it kind of harkens back to me to the old fundamentalism, where it's like, yeah, these guys are, they're not drawn from the Bible. They're just exegeting pagan cultures. It's like, what?
Yeah.
It's just crazy how they don't understand. Like, excuse me, but the Bible you're reading in English actually is understood through interacting with pagan cultures.
Yeah, I received an email the other day from somebody who wanted to argue Genesis chapter 6 and said, it can't mean this because you see there's a semicolon right here.
Really?
It's like, okay, you do realize that in Hebrew there was no punctuation.
No, they don't. They don't.
Yeah, they don't.
It's like that parody song. It's like that parody song. If the King James Bible was good enough for John the Baptist, it's good enough for me.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Right,
here, listen,
right.
guys, these are like, I've heard this from like Reformed theological guys who, in my opinion, a lot of Reformed people are among the smartest in terms of their theology, in terms of really studying the Bible and all that. But they get it wrong, just like the simple-minded fundamentalists who, it's actually shocked me when I've heard it from people who would have a respect for. And it's like, you don't understand the ancient Near Eastern context in terms of coming to understand this meaning of these strange words. Like, you should know better. I mean, that's how I felt about some of the, the differences of opinion that have been launched at me in that sense. It's kind of shocking.
It's an interesting thing in this world, Brian, because they have no problem bringing the Puritans or the Reformers to influence how they're reading the Bible, but for whatever reason, they don't want to go back to the actual culture in which it was written.
Yeah, so true.
Or the contemporary commentators that were alive commenting on said ancient scripture.
Right.
That's I'm always harping on it too. Context is theology is content. It's the circle that you have to take into account. I remember the first lecture that I ever got in an upper level division history class was like the cardinal rule. This was like the distillation of all historiographical laws to live by, was that you don't commit presentism. You don't project. You have to understand what's going on in the minds of the culture of the past. Your biggest infraction as a historian or philologist or anybody that looks at the ancient world is not taking into account the writers, the specialist on the one hand, but the audience. And that gets into the importance of understanding something about the languages that were being used and the idioms that we know about. And Mike, even with the language training that I had up to that point, Mike helped to really, really dial that in even further than any of the schooling that I had. And that's why I say he put a lot of the pieces on the board for me and answered a lot of questions. So that I came away from graduate school using anthropological models in a decidedly different way than my own field at the time uses them, which had been thoroughly corrupted by postmodernism.
Wow.
And so, and really that's part of the beauty of Mike's ministry too, is that, having such a heart for the layperson and getting them to understand the really crucial, not so much that you had to master, ancient Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek or what have you. That would certainly help, because there are all these tools that can help you to get to that, so that you can begin to understand, the nuance and the audience and what the writers had in mind when they were writing. And understanding all that just makes the whole process of how the Bible came into being and all of its weird, high strangeness, all that more miraculous, in my estimation.
He was the kind of guy that, because he was so willing to share and so positive, especially with those of us who are not academics. And, I mentioned before that he's had several books published by Defender Publishing, which, of course, Tom would bring him out to out here to the Ozarks to appear on Skywatch TV. And so I got to sit in on a number of those programs. In fact, one of the real highlights of my, if you want to call it a career as an author, was having one of my books bundled with one of Mike's as part of, one of those special deals back in, about 5-6 years ago. And I think as Mike saw that, what direction Sharon and I were going through our contact over the interviews over the years, beginning in 2005 to where we are now, through the partnership with Tom Horn, Skywatch TV, Defender Publishing, and now doing our own ministry. And he was very encouraging and shared not just his own work, but just research. Hey, I think you'd like this paper here. I think you, in fact, a friend of his shared with me that at one of the ETS conferences, one of these academic conferences, he was there. He was looking for things that Sharon and I would find useful in what we were working on. It's like, okay, who am I? I mean, I'm just, former radio disc jockey with good reading comprehension,
Brilliant reading comprehension, dude. Or do you have a photographic memory?
No,
exactly.
No, I don't. I wish I did, but it's just weird enough that if I find a topic really interesting, I can remember a lot about it. Ask me the starting lineup of the 1969 Chicago Cubs. I still remember that.
You are weird.
And I wanted to say one more thing about that we've kind of danced around a little bit, touched on a little bit too. And Derek, you just said something that kind of made me think even a little bit more about it. I remember we came out here and went to visit Tom. It was because the ETS was in Denver that year. So I was 20. Yeah, right about the time, right at the time that Tom was almost gone. And the thing that Mike did is when he was at the conference, he went and he deliberately interviewed all these scholars.
Yes.
And had them on tape and would do, kind of mini podcasts or whatever with those guys. So this is one of the things that I have since the very, very beginning. I've been so impressed with him, and I don't think I've ever seen it in a biblical scholar before in any other person I've known. I mean, other scholars, other disciplines, maybe. But in somebody who's like fanatic about languages, I mean, my experience has been those kind of people are completely different types of thinkers than what you get with Mike. And I think a huge part of his genius is that he was so confident, and he is so confident, as the moment we're making this, in his own scholarship and what he knows and his training, that he does not care to be respected by his peers and forced to get some sort of a publication in an academic public publishing house. He would go to Defender. I mean, you brought it up earlier at the very beginning, right? Of being associated with Tom Horn. He didn't care. And he's like, I have a mission. I have a goal. My goal is I'm Gandalf and I'm going to reach Middle Earth. Mm-hmm. And I don't care how it's done. I'm going to do it. And it's like that kind of big picture thinking is the reason I think all of us are here. If he's just another scholar who's into his books and living in his ivory tower, none of us are doing this. But he has this vision and this desire to see the world reached. And he's like, everything that he's doing is deliberate to make that happen. From going on coast to coast to having Defender Publishing publish Mount Hermon book, to doing Fringe Pop 321 to Pure Normal. The whole deal is circled around that. And like, how many scholars are there? Like I said, I don't know of any that have that kind of almost a business-like mentality, marketing sort of thing to go with the incredible brain that the man has.
I think we would be remiss if we also didn't attach to that, or is the fact that part of that package was he really did have a heart for the gospel and evangelism.
Right.
And, I mean, he had his books translated in multiple languages. He wants to get it out to the world. And of course, obviously, the company wants to make money. But the truth was he was driven by and it wasn't just the unseen realm. It was, what was it? What does God want? I never read that one, but certainly that was his attempt to describe, well, what's the gospel and how do people get saved and how can they find God? And that's one of the tomes that he also has been trying to get translated into languages for all around the world. So he's always had that desire. And even his last post that he had posted on Facebook, he really was it sounded like a charge from the Apostle Paul, of just, a focus on the gospel. And it's this understanding this supernatural worldview of God, but it was really even more about the kingdom of God, I think.
Yeah.
And that needs to be said,
Well, and even Mike's fiction efforts were oriented toward that. The Facade and the Portent, which are, for people looking in from the outside, it's kind of a new take on the UFO phenomenon and the alien abduction and contactee phenomenon. But it was done from a biblically, theologically sound perspective. He used conversations between the characters to elucidate some of these points, the biblical framework through which we believers can understand the UFO phenomenon and the contactee, abductee phenomena. It was, I've had said for many, many years that was the only fiction book that I kept on my reference shelf because there were things in there that are historically accurate and true as far as the UFO phenomenon was concerned.
Some of Brian's too.
And I should qualify that as, until Brian Godawa came along.
Right. With all my footnoting in my novels.
Which is really a remarkable thing. So Mike used multiple streams of information to get the word out. And
which, by the way, the reason why he did write that was because he loves fiction.
Yes.
He loves, Stranger Things is one of his favorite, series, right?
Right. And that's one of his books, the Gospel According to Stranger Things, the Upside Down. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that was cool because that connects him even more so with the common people, that love for the entertainment medium and seeing the power of storytelling. So that was cool.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Yeah. For my experience of the myth that is true, it wasn't actually the Nephilim that caught me. I thought that was interesting, and I wrote a book about it because of it. But like I told you guys, that was me trying to figure out what was going on. And then I thought, well, I bet I could actually sell this. But that wasn't what caught my attention in that book. It was the way that he talked about Christ in the Old Testament. That's what caught my attention. And he can't stand it when you make Christ on every page and you just sort of like put a square peg in a round hole. He hates that kind of stuff. And he wasn't doing that at all. And yet in an incredibly ironic way that all these Christ in the Old Testament people don't get, he's literally saying Christ on every page in the Old Testament, just not the way you think it is.
Yeah. I
think, that. Brian, that to me, that's what hit about your gospel point. Like that was the main thing that I took away from that book. And that showed me that this is a man who loves the gospel of Jesus Christ
and loves Jesus, not just not just theology,
right?
Like really, really loves.
And he understands on a very fundamental, on a very universally human level, what resonates with people. I know that I've said this in a couple of interviews before, and I don't mean this metaphorically, but mythology is kind of like the mother tongue of humanity. And, Brian, you're always talking about, all of us are involved in drafting and writing some kind of a narrative. We're storytellers by nature.
Yeah.
I through our various platforms, that's what we do. And I think in a way that certainly different than what C.S. Lewis did. But C.S. Lewis, I think, articulated some of those things, and Mike just he brought it to a whole other level. And my experience was similar to Doug's in reading Myth is True, because, and may not have been, because when I read it, I was again deep in the throes of my anthropological training and education, and I was looking at all kinds of comparative mythology, and he just brought a lot of that to life. And to not to circle back entirely, but one of the things that Mike did, not just they fed into each other, but evangelically he had such a heart for the layperson, but he also he also understands, and he and I have talked about this on a number of occasions, how just abysmally awful academics are at talking outside of their echo chambers.
Exactly.
So we go to our conference and and nobody, if you were to film it, most people would tilt their head and scratch their head. What's going on here? Not because they don't have the intelligence to grasp what's going on there, but just the academy is that it's usually spoken in. It really drifts away from what we're talking about, the storytelling and the narrative telling that resonates with everybody. And Mike is really it's important to me too, as a scholar, to communicate, the kinds of things that we research, to a larger audience, to everybody. Otherwise, what are we doing? I mean, it's a rather selfish, myopic sort of direction that you're headed. If that's all you're doing all this research just for your little club. Mike is if not the best, he's definitely one of the best scholars that's mastered the art of communicating successfully to such a broad audience beyond just scholarly.
Yeah.
And I've always
I was gonna say, I had the same experience with the myth that is true too. Was like, it wasn't just like, oh yeah, see, you look at the translation of the words and the semantics and all that. In Nephilim is giants. It's not just warriors. Yeah, it was, but why? And that was the thing that hooked me, because I don't, so you explaining a couple strange anomalies and here's the answer. So what? But in his explanation was like, yeah, but why are giants there, and how it's all tied into this storyline along with all the strange passages. It's like that power that is, and also I think the whole concept of, okay, but even then it's like, what's the point of this new understanding? What does it bring? Well, it actually is reflective of a fresh way of understanding God created his family, and the goal is to to build a family back into the human race, and it wasn't just arbitrary theology, but it was also woven into, in that sense, the gospel. I mean, certainly the kingdom of God, the body of Christ, and how that all applies, So that was kind of cool.
And again, he's reached out through multiple channels to do this. His websites are still up and active, and you can find him online, drmsh.com, thedivinecouncil.com, Miklot, M-I-Q-L-A-T, miklot.org. Many teaching resources there. And it's like he opened the window, to the room where all of the scholars are talking and having these academies conversations. And he's like, okay, guys, here's what they're saying, and here's what's important, so that those of us outside that room are getting the information. It's like there's a bottleneck between all of this information that's available to scholars. I mean, when I started down this road and was having to learn really basic things like history, who are the Amorites? I'd never heard of the Amorites before about 2015 or so.
Yeah.
Why are they important? What's the sin of the Amorites? What's all that about? Well, there are biblical archaeologists and historians who know those things, but they don't talk to the people in the pews. Yeah,
we don't know about it.
And Mike is bridging that gap, and I think what all of us have been doing in our own way is sort of picking up that burden, which none of us is carrying to the extent that Mike has, and just trying to take that forward.
But yet he did bring that scholarly, academic respectability of the authority that I think, which is another, another, to me, a thing that I get mad with God about, because it's like, God, we need Mike, and because he's that scholar that finally, all of us talking about this stuff, we could easily just be written off, right? As, oh, well, they're not scholars and stuff. And so that's pop stuff, right?
Right.
But now all these scholars who, because of his unseen realm, are not just scholars, but I mean, more of the scholarly people in our Christian culture have to address the divine council like they never had before. And which is just, that's been that open door for us. And, he was our theologian of choice for, we're not crazy nuts. We've got scholars behind us, and not just liberal scholars, but actually evangelical ones who actually believe the Bible's God's word,
Well, his legacy is going to continue on. Miklot will continue his nonprofit organization. I'll put links in the show notes so that you watching or listening at home can continue to support the work that Mike has begun. And as you've been listening over the last hour, you know how important Mike has been to us. And, well, Brian, you said change the course of your life. Just same for me. I'd be selling steel still. If the Bible was just a great, just a great bunch of stories, myths, or fairy tales or whatever, go out and still be making sales calls and then podcasting about weird stuff on the weekend. But suddenly understanding, wait a minute, this is all important because it's all connected to the struggle and to the sacrifice that Jesus made for us. Okay, there's a calling here. And, it wasn't that we went out, I don't think any of us went out looking for some new weird way to present the Bible because it's sensational. It's like, wait a minute, this is all really, really important. And the world needs to know about it. These people in the pews need to know about this. We need to remove that bottleneck between what the academics know and what's getting to the people in the pews on Sunday mornings.
Amen.
Yeah. Well,
Absolutely.
we look forward to many more years of doing this, but as God, for His own reasons and His own plan, none of us knows what the future holds for us. But as long as we can run this race, I pray that we can do it like Mike has, running while he still had strength, right up to the final bell. And we are all blessed and the richer for it. Doug Van Dorn and Brian Godawa, Dr. Jed Burton, thank you for joining us, and we'll look forward to doing this again next month.